So as I say, our next speaker is Valerie MOJEIKO from MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. Valerie is really the #2 person there and responsible for a lot of the good work while Rick is going out and speaking at engagements and proselytizing and being the president of it. Valerie is doing research studies and outreach for harm reduction purposes at places like Burning Man and other venues. Excuse me. So Valerie's talk is Psychedelic Harm Reduction, Rethinking the Bad Trip. And again, I'll let her speak to her own content, but let me give you her bio. And anybody else in the back of the room who would like to come take a chair would be appreciated. Valerie MOJEIKO received an education in psychology and integral theory at New College of Florida and CIIS, the California Institute for Integral Studies. She's worked with MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. And by the way, if you're not a subscriber to MAPS, you all should, anybody who's in this room, not only should be because you'll love it, but should be because it's an obligation that we all have to support this kind of work. MAPS is about research and policy, and I think it's $35 or $50 for a subscription, a membership. Sorry, it's not that much, and you get this spectacular professional bulletin quarterly, and a lot of other things too, resources. So I point you over to the MAPS table, and if you're not a member already, please become one. Okay, so Valerie's worked with MAPS since 2000. MAPS is a nonprofit 501c3 pharmaceutical company and educational organization currently conducting clinical trials under the US FDA with psychedelic medicines, MDMA or Ecstasy, LSD and Psilocybin. Valerie travels the globe to provide assistance and quality control to studies of MDMA and LSD-assisted therapy in 7 different countries. In her related work, leading MAPS Harm Reduction Project, she's prepared over 200 volunteers to provide peer-based psychedelic emergency services from Burning Man to Tel Aviv. As I turn you over to the very capable hands of Valerie MOJEIKO, please help me welcome her.
Thank you so much for having me here, Neil and Kevin and all of you. It's really exciting to come out here from California and join you all at the Horizons conference. So I want to ask you all a question first. How many of you are here at this conference because you personally had a psychedelic experience? Does anyone not raise their hand? I don't know if I even saw anyone not raise their hand. Now, how many of you have ever had a bad trip? Wow. I'm sorry, you guys. That's a lot. But it is good for right now, for our purposes, because this is what we're going to be talking about today, rethinking and reframing the bad trip. So I'm going to talk to you about my experiences with psychedelic emergency work, my personal experiences that led me into this work, techniques for working with someone who's undergoing a psychedelic emergency, and how all of this fits into MAP's mission of making psychedelics and marijuana into prescription medicines. Okay, you got that? My name is Valerie, and I'm the Deputy Director at MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. MAPS is doing clinical studies with the US FDA to make MDMA and other psychedelics available as medicines. We have studies in several different countries. We just finished one in Charleston, South Carolina, and we got really good results. We're looking to publish our paper now. We have a study that's almost finished in Switzerland, and another one that's ongoing in Israel, one in development in Jordan, one in development in Canada, and another in development in the US. These are all MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. Why do we use post-traumatic stress disorder? Why do we treat a certain disorder with MDMA? It's because in order for a drug to be approved as a medicine, it needs to be for a certain condition. You can't just approve a medicine because it would be fun or because of other spiritual reasons, but you have to have an actual disorder that it's approved for. So MAPS is, in essence, a nonprofit pharmaceutical company. we're working to develop medicines that there's not a lot of money to be made out of. These medicines, we don't expect to administer MDMA or LSD every day, like you would with an antidepressant. It's something that's done once, maybe 3 times in the course of psychotherapy. So this is my day job. I work at MAPS Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, but I'm also interested in it for personal reasons and just as interested in psychedelics as all of you are, I'm sure. So how I first became involved is because when I was in high school, I heard about Ecstasy. And I had never tried it, but I heard there was this drug. I heard many things about Ecstasy. Many of them later turned out not to be true. But one that did turn out to be true is that it was once used in therapy before it became illegal. And I was like, well, that sounds really interesting. I want to try that. So I did. And when I was 18, I did it with a really good friend of mine who we'd known since we were really little. And it was one of the best experiences of my life. It was amazing. The short story is that I hugged him for the first time. We had always been friends, but I was always very standoffish. And that ecstasy experience really changed something in me in terms of how to relate to other people and myself. So it was really powerful. And it led me to do what I'm doing today. And it led me also to do a bunch of other psychedelic experiences. Many of them were also very good and easy and beneficial and fun until a few years ago when I had my bad trip. So I had started out working at MAPS, and I was doing a study with Ibogaine in the treatment of drug addiction, trying to do a study rather. And I thought, well, this is an interesting opportunity. I haven't tried Ibogaine. Maybe I should try that. If I'm doing a study with it, I should know what it's like. So I had an opportunity to go across the border and do Ibogaine at a clinic there. And I was like, okay, well, will be good preparation for this study. The first thing that happens when I get to the clinic is they do some routine physical tests to make sure that I'm healthy enough to have the treatment. So I have my temperature checked, they look at my ears, my eyes, they listen to my heart. And the doctor says, well, it sounds like you have a heart murmur, but it's probably going to be okay. So I thought, well, it's probably going to be okay. I did come all the way out here to this clinic to do this. I mean, it'll probably be okay. So I went ahead with the treatment, and we went into the room, and the doctor, he's very well-intentioned, never done psychedelics before, but he hooks me up to all these monitors and stuff to make sure that I'll be safe during the treatment. And so one of them is that he puts these like electrodes on me or something, I think that's what they're called, and puts the heart monitor to face me and gives me the drug. So I take the drug and he's like, here's your heart monitor, your heart should be between 60 and 90. And then he leaves the room. So I'm laying there in bed and the effects start coming on and I'm like, well, I'll just look over and check just to make sure, you know? And I look over and it's like 70. I'm like, well, that's good. It starts getting a little stronger. I look over again. I'll just check one more time. It's like 90. And then I'm like, okay, laying there at 90. And it gets stronger and stronger. And I keep looking and looking. And my heart rate keeps going up and up and up. And eventually it got to 130. I was laying completely still. That's normally like my jogging heart rate. And it stayed that way for 8 hours. And I was lying completely still. I basically had like an 8-hour panic attack. It was very, very uncomfortable, extremely. So, what could have been done differently in this situation? Or what was not done that great? One is that, so they tried to make me feel safe by doing all these heart tests and the heart monitor, but I didn't feel safe because I didn't really understand why my heart rate was so high, and I thought that for the whole experience that I was probably going to die that night. I didn't know what was going on. So the first thing to do when someone's having that experience is to make them feel safe, physically safe. And a good sitter can do that by reassuring the person that they are physically safe, you're looking out for their safety, and also that if something goes wrong and they're not physically safe, that you will be able to take care of it and do something about it. The next thing that a good sitter can do, and now this is on a spectrum, is to sit and not guide. In my situation, it was on the far other end of the spectrum, which is that no one was in the room at all with me. So there really wasn't anyone sitting. The other end of the spectrum where you can kind of go wrong is to guide too much, to assume that you know better than the person knows where their experience should go or what they should be feeling or thinking. So a good sitter can just can follow the person's experience and let the person guide, because they're the one having the experience and they know where they need to go. Another thing that kind of went wrong during my experience was the doctor would periodically come in the room and was understandably upset that my heart rate was 130, not because I was dying, but because I was having a panic attack, as I later learned. But he would come in and he would get down by the bed and he would say, "Calm down, calm down." And the poor guy, he meant well, but he had never done anything like this before. And in me and my state, all I could think was that if I don't calm down, my heart's going to explode. But that's not what he meant. So what you want to try to do, because talking someone down is never going to work anyway, rather than distract them, is try to get them to confront whatever it is that they're facing and talk them through the experience, to sit with the uncomfortable emotions rather than trying to avoid them. The last thing to kind of keep in mind as a sitter is that difficult is not necessarily bad. And there's a large number of things in life that are very difficult and very rewarding, and they make you a stronger person afterwards. So a difficult trip doesn't need to be a bad trip. So what was going on inside my head during this experience? What is any bad trip like? I know that we all like to hear, and we all have our own bad trip stories. So I'll tell you, for me, a lot of it was about having to be too still and needing to have an energetic release, which I couldn't have because I had taken these anti-nausea pills, and Ibogaine paralyzes you from the waist down, and all these terrible things. I mean, it's a great substance, really, but for the right situation. But a lot of things that can happen, you're going crazy, losing your mind, paranoia. I was very certain that the doctor and the nurse who spoke a different language than me were telling each other that I was about to die, and then they would tell me in English, "Oh, you're fine." I had a lot of that, and being stuck. So these are all common features that people can have. Here's a few more, just in case you were wondering, of different features that someone may have during a difficult experience. I'm sure that if we did a quick survey right now, we could double, triple, or quadruple this list, even with all kinds of unique varieties of torture that people have had. But the experience these are all things that can be difficult, but they can also be opportunities, and they can also be healing. The thing that makes it bad, in my opinion, is when you're afraid to confront it and you're not given that safe space, and being confronted with the anxiety of confronting something. And that's where I think it can spin off into a truly bad experience rather than a difficult one. So here's a quote from Stan Groff, who I recommend reading his books for information about how to handle all kinds of psychedelic experiences, difficult or otherwise. He says, if properly handled, a psychedelic crisis has great positive potential and can result in a profound personality transformation. Conversely, an insensitive and ignorant approach can cause psychological damage and lead to chronic psychotic states and years of psychiatric treatment and struggles. So a little bit I want to tell you about our model of how we have created these psychedelic emergency service places. We rely largely on volunteers. I'm curious to see how many psychedelic emergency services volunteers are in the audience right now. We have a few people. I think I've actually been invited because two of our volunteers, Neil and Kevin, are actually running this conference. So I've got to meet a lot of really great people coordinating the volunteers. It's been a great experience. And although some people are medical professionals, a lot of people aren't. And it's largely peer-based. There's all levels of professionals in the group. But why do people do it? I can only really speak for myself when I say this, but I think a lot of us do it because we wish that someone had been there at a time when we needed them. And so we want to give back and be there for someone else. The thing that's interesting about it also is that we try to apply some psychedelic psychotherapy principles to the work, but the difference is that we don't get introductory sessions when we're working with someone at a festival or at an event where someone's having a psychedelic emergency. We meet them in the middle of their emergency. So we often have no idea what's going on, and we just really are forced into a situation which is ultimately a good one to let the person guide the experience, because we have no idea. We've only met them in the middle of this monumental time in their lives. We began doing this work at Burning Man, the Boom Festival, several other festivals around, because these are places where people are doing psychedelics. And we worked with the rangers for a while and had it set up at Burning Man, where if someone was having a difficult experience, the rangers would bring them to us, and that's kind of how the majority of our model got put into place. We're unfortunately not doing it there now. But our goal with this work, with the Psychedelic Emergency Services, is to turn an emergency into an opportunity, basically, an opportunity for growth, understanding, transformation, healing, to look at it as an opportunity rather than this thing that you need to get by. A few of the basic techniques that we use, and keeping in mind these people, some of them might be therapists or physicians, but many of them are not. Many of them are people like me who have just had experiences and want to be there for someone. That the first thing that we do is to do nothing. It's better to just be there with someone and make sure that they're safe and they're not going to be run over by a car or need water or need someone there. So it's better to just sit there with them and do nothing than to do more than we're qualified to do. The first thing that we do look out for is their physical safety, to make sure that they're physically safe and to let them know that. And also just to respect and honor them and make sure that they're in a place where they can feel that and they won't be around other people who might not be treating them that way or putting them down or judging. And a lot of what we do is just creating a physical space. You saw how important the rug was for Dr. Ross's team at NYU. It's very important, the physical space where someone has a trip. So a lot of that is just making sure that they're in a physical space that's not too overwhelming or distracting and is comfortable for them to go where they need to go and not feel like they're inhibited at all. And finally, again, we let them lead the experience. We don't try to take them well, now you're going to confront something difficult. Now you're going to feel great. We just let them go where they need to go. A few other things that you can do if someone gets stuck is to take a walk with them, have them express their experience through making a sound or a movement, and basically just encouraging that they express emotions if they are being stuck in that. And also allowing them an opportunity to lie down with blindfold, with eyes closed, and to go inside. Sometimes someone who's having this experience will want to reach out and have more involvement from the sitter. And in that situation, you can remind them that this will pass, this is a process, but it is an opportunity, and now is probably a good time to work on what you need to work on, but that this opportunity will end at some point. That other people have had this experience before, maybe not this exact one, but lots of other people have had really difficult experiences, and we've all lived through them. Reminding them that there will be support afterwards, that they can stay as long as they want. We give out our phone numbers, and if they want to call afterwards and process it, they can. A few people have. And just really reminding people that they are safe, that they are physically safe. We're watching out for them, for their physical body, and if they need anything, they can ask us. And that if we see something dangerous happening, we will prevent people from getting harmed. So what about integration? Integration can happen for a long time after the experience. Going back to my story, what happened after I left the clinic, and in my experience, it was difficult and it was bad, and there wasn't a lot of confrontation or good things that came out of it immediately. But 4 days after I left the clinic, I got an excruciating pain in my back where I couldn't walk, I couldn't stand up, lie down, anything without severe pain. And I'd never had anything like it before, and I'm completely sure and convinced that it was related to the Ibogaine, and it was a physical manifestation of the pain that I went through. But the thing about it was it forced me to work through it. I went to my doctor, who recommended I go to a physical therapist, who recommended I go to the gym. So I got a personal trainer, and I started working on strength training, and I found that I actually really liked it. I had never really been that active before, but I loved going to the gym, and then that got me into dance. And I found that I really, really liked that. And now I have a small dance company in Santa Cruz where we perform a few times a year, and it's kind of awesome. Even though if I had to go back, I definitely wouldn't do the Ibogaine again. I can see that all of this, it came from that in a way. Other techniques for me, so for me it was movement and getting in touch with my body that I got in the integration and I got from the experience. But there's all different kinds of ways you can work with it, all different directions you can go for integration. But luckily for me, my story ended up a good story ultimately. In terms of the things I've seen as a Psychedelic Emergency Services coordinator, I can tell you a few stories. The first person that I ever sat for at an event was at Hookahville Music Festival in Ohio, and this guy had come in. He was like a statue on the dance floor. He couldn't move, or he wouldn't move, but he was just standing there, and he was kind of a hazard because he was just standing there. And he could have easily been picked up by the medics or the cops, but we were there, so he came to our tent, and we all took turns sitting for him. And I think he eventually did move, but it looked really scary, like he would thrash around and like make some sounds, and He definitely wouldn't communicate in words at all. And I remember he stayed in there for about 3 or 4 hours, and then suddenly he just sat up and he said, "Wow, that was amazing." And he was so thankful. He was like, "Thank you guys for being there for me. That was so amazing. That was so nice." And he totally registered all of it. He was like, "And you were there, and you were there, and you were telling me these nice things, and he was so grateful that we were just sitting there with him. And then he said, "Oh, and now I want to do it again." And we tried to convince him not to do that. I'm not sure what we did. Another thing that happened was I was at Burning Man in the ranger sanctuary working there. And one of the rangers who administered the sanctuary actually came in as a visitor because he had been sprayed with water that had LSD in it on accident. And this guy had smoked pot before. He had never tripped on anything. So he was understandably a little nervous, being that he was not prepared at all, and he's at Burning Man and just got off his shift. And so we sat him down and we said, "Well, this really sucks, but you're in a pretty good place, probably one of the best places. You have all of us here for you." We actually had a psychedelic therapist there also, so there's not really anything you can do to go back, but you can stay here as long as you want. So he sat there for a while, a little nervous, and then the medicine started to take more effect. And then he said, "Well, I guess I'll go out and dance." So he left and had his first experience. And I think that because we were there, he was able to go out and do that because he knew that he could come back at any time if he needed to. We were there for him. And he came back later and said he had a good time. Some people, another story is of this boy that I was sitting with, a number of us were sitting with also. He seemed like he was having kind of to my untrained eye anyway, a classic LSD kind of confusing trip. And he stayed and he kept having this trip, and he was talking in loops, and it was word salad, and you could kind of tell what he was saying, but not really. And it stayed that way for all day, through my shift, through the next shift, through the next shift. And eventually we realized that he wasn't on a psychedelic, that he was off of his medications. So that person ended up going back to Reno, to the emergency. So we do get that as well. Another thing that happens, every year we have at least one, usually more than one, of the sanctuary volunteers end up coming into sanctuary as visitors. Yeah. So we're peers, we're all peers, and it happens to everyone. We all end up there and appreciate it. And here's a little anecdote from former MAPS staffer Brandy Doyle about her, who used to coordinate the sanctuary project. Holding the hand of a screaming man tied to a table in a medical tent, I realized that the situation felt less like psychedelic therapy than it did like a psychedelic Civil War hospital. Yep. So just briefly how this fits in, that this project allows us to give back to the community, realizing that not all trips are good, easy, or even necessarily beneficial, but that we can give back and to the community and help take care of other people. It also allowed us opportunities to train therapists and work together as different therapists in different countries who are working on psychedelic studies to actually work in real time together. And it fulfills an educational portion of our mission to let people know about the value of psychedelic experiences, to minimize the occurrence of negative psychedelic experiences, and allow us to reach out not just to the psychedelic community here who come to things like this, but the larger psychedelic community of all people that are actually doing these drugs. So we're basically transforming a bad trip into an opportunity for growth, healing, and understanding. Here's some resources. Go to the MAPS website. It includes an excellent FAQ by the Arrowids coming up next. And I'll leave you with these 10 ways that you can get involved. Give us your email address, read our books at the MAPS table, join our Facebook group, join the Cosmic Care Facebook group. They are still doing psychedelic emergency services at Boom and in other countries. Sign up for the 10-10-10 challenge, which Brian can tell you about the MAPS table. Donate things to our auction. Have a movie night in your home with your friends to talk about psychedelics. Come to our conference next year. Volunteer your time, skills, expertise, or make a tax-deductible donation. We'll accept between $10 and $10 million, more or less. So you can talk to Rick Doblin, our executive director and founder, who's in the back. And I know this is an overly positive note, but thank you, everyone.
Anybody have some questions or comments? Discussion to add?
Do you just have training sessions so that people can do it at like festivals and stuff, or would you set up something here in New York just so that when we return to our folds of friends and we're doing what we're doing in our living rooms, that we can just help our own communities out?
Well, I've thought about that before, and if someone had a group of people together between 20 and 50 people, I think it could definitely be worthwhile to arrange some site-specific trainings, and I'd be happy to be involved in that.
Oh, hello. I wanted to say what you said about your Ibogaine experience, about how you felt that you were restricted, and maybe if you weren't hooked up to electrodes, and you were able to move around, that you would have been able to release and get out of this feeling of being stuck in this prolonged panic attack feeling. And I wondered, well, and also to add to that Ibogaine, I think in traditional setting, it's a lot of dancing is involved in the ritual, and probably the same can be said about a lot of these other substances. So how can we move closer to integrating, is there a way to integrate that and to balance it out so it's not always, lie down, cover your eyes, and go inward, but if someone wants to get up and do yoga or something in the middle of the session, would you say, no, go inward, go inward?
Well, I think that the people that are using Ibogaine in the Indigenous setting, I think that they've been doing it that way for a really long time, and they probably have figured some things out that work with the drug, and I think there's a lot of things to learn from that. I agree. I think it can be dangerous to take things out of context without learning more, but then again, we need a different context than they do because we don't live in the jungle. We live in a place with lots of buildings and not a lot of trees. So, or at least if you live in New York City, you do. So I don't know if yoga or something like that would have been more helpful. It's a good question, though.
Other questions? Here's a man who's eager to ask a question.
So you've talked about remediating negative experiences, and my question is a follow-up of his, which is how would you potentiate positive ones? Which is to say, what would you suggest in sitting with people who are having a good time, or how to make it so that someone has a better time who's already having a good time?
Well, the funny thing is that I don't think about the good times that much. I just kind of appreciate them. And so I don't really know how you would make it better to me. But to me, some of my best times have been alternately crying and laughing on mushrooms, for instance, where part of the time it's not really that fun, and part of the time it's really, really fun. But I think that it sounds like a worthy course of study, and if you learn anything about how to make good experiences better, I want to be the first to know.
Other questions? Sir.
So as many of the people in this audience probably know, the Grateful Dead and the bands of their members have a psychiatric emergency service called Rock Med at their shows. And I was just wondering, what is the relationship of the ones that you were involved in with Rock Med? And were you inspired by them? Is your model the same, et cetera?
Yeah, Rock Med is really, it's inspiring how many different things they've done this at. They weren't at the particular things that we were at least as far as I know. Boom Festival, Burning Man, Hookahville, a couple other smaller ones. But I don't know enough about how Rock Med works, but I think that ours might be different a little bit in that we happen to have all of these really great therapists that are involved, and I think the thing that makes us unique is that we're not trying to talk people down. And I don't know enough about how Rock Med works, and maybe they also ascribe to that approach, but I think that's what's so important about the technique in terms of what I've seen just in general, like the average response, which is ignore, here's a slinky. That I think trying to sit with it and going inside is a unique part.
A comment over here?
Oh, I've been into many ayahuasca sessions in my life, and they make the environment very safe by having people around you very trained, and you focus on the songs and the dance, and it's very, very direct. Your inner world was what is being said in the lyrics. So I've been to many of them and seen people in a lot of trouble, but also coming out of the trouble was a lot of happy ending.
Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's something we can definitely learn from, the ayahuasca experience and how people handle that, because it's well thought out and organized. And I also, just as another resource while he's getting the next question, I wanted to show you a really excellent video that was made by former MAP staffer and current DPA staffer Jag Davies, but we didn't have enough time. It is on our website. It's an educational video about how to help someone who's having a difficult trip, which was actually made for high school students, but I think it's interesting for anyone to watch, and it has some pretty hilarious acting in it. So I would recommend watching that on your own time.
Other comments, questions? Sir.
I was wondering, how have you dealt with, or if you haven't had to deal with, how would you deal with someone having a violent outburst in one of these situations?
We've had people we have had to deal with that before, and one of the things that we try to do is to balance out the volunteers that are there with male and female, and particularly to try to have someone, at least male or female, who's kind of stronger to help subdue someone. But we had an instance, which is something that kind of led to us not working with Burning Man anymore, where there was a pretty large man who was freaking out and being borderline violent, who we had a kind of a disagreement with how to handle it. And they ended up taking him away and shackling him because the rangers didn't think it was safe and that he might hurt someone. But I think generally our approach would have been to try not to have to do that, if possible. But also just being really mindful of the safety of the volunteers, because I don't want to get bitten by some frothing maniac.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. I work in an emergency room, and every once in a while get a patient who comes in with a bad trip. What I usually do is I put them in a room with an infomercial, dark lights, and about 4 or 5 hours later they emerge, happy as a clam. I don't know if they go on to buy the product, but it's probably one of the most effective measures.
With an infomercial. Interesting. You put them in a room with an infomercial? Is that what you said? You could.
It bores them out of it, I guess. Well, thank you very much.
That's one way
again.
to handle it.
Sorry. Whatever works, right?
Yeah.
Okay, will you help me thank Valerie?